If the Iranian regime is so dangerous, why haven't Trump and Netanyahu overthrown the Ayatollahs once and for all? Is it fear, strategy, or a trap that the world has yet to understand? In recent months, Israeli bombings of Iranian territory have shaken the country's defenses. Military bases have been destroyed, anti-aircraft systems have been neutralized, and nuclear facilities have been severely damaged. The theocratic regime has suffered real blows. And now, the burning question returns with full force. With Iran so weakened, why don't the United States and Israel take advantage of the opportunity to overthrow the Ayatollah's regime once and for all? At first glance, it seems simple. The US has one of the greatest military powers on the planet, powerful allies, cutting-edge technology. Israel has one of the best intelligence services in the world and a direct interest in seeing Iran destabilized. So why the hesitation? To understand this, we need to look at the past. The United States has a long history of military interventions with a well-defined objective: to eliminate hostile governments and implement allied models. Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya. The logic behind these actions was always the same. Remove the dictator, establish a democracy, gain a strategic ally. But this formula has rarely worked. One of the most emblematic cases is Iraq. In 2003, Saddam Hussein was quickly overthrown. But what followed was a nightmare. A power vacuum, civil war, and the emergence of extremist groups such as the Islamic State. The country became a minefield of internal disputes, divided along sectarian lines and fragile alliances. And the most ironic thing, what was supposed to be a democratic Iraq aligned with the West became, in practice, a stage for Iranian influence. Libya followed the same tragic path. Muammar Gaddafi was removed with Western support. And what was left? A disintegrated country, taken over by militias, where the state practically does not exist. Interventions of this kind have created more chaos than stability. And that's where Iran comes in. Yes, it is an authoritarian regime. Yes, it funds terrorist groups. Yes, it persecutes opponents and directly threatens Israel. But Iran is also a country of 90 million people with extremely difficult geography, a large army, a highly effective repressive machine, and, most importantly, no viable alternative leadership that could unite the country after the possible fall of the Ayatollahs. And this is a critical point. You may even be able to overthrow a regime, but what happens next? Who takes over? Who ensures order? Who prevents chaos from spreading? In Iran, there is currently no legitimate, popular figure with enough power to lead a peaceful transition. Much of the population, after 46 years of repression and indoctrination, still supports the regime or, at the very least, fears what would come after it. And importing a leader from outside, such as the former Shah's son, Reza Pahlavi, could have the opposite effect. Instead of uniting the people, it could reinforce the narrative of foreign imposition, fueling even more internal resistance. And this is not a theoretical concern. History confirms it. In 1953, the CIA orchestrated a coup that overthrew then-Iranian Prime Minister Mohammad Mossadegh, who wanted to nationalize the oil industry. The Shah, aligned with Western interests, was reinstated in power. But the resentment that had been planted there grew for decades. In 1979, it exploded with the Islamic Revolution that put the Ayatollahs in power, the very regime that the West has been trying to contain to this day. A costly shot in the foot. So the question comes back sharper. Is it really a good idea to repeat the mistakes of the past? Could it be that overthrowing a regime without knowing what to put in its place is the perfect formula for creating yet another monster? Trump and Netanyahu know this, and perhaps that's why they haven't pulled the final trigger. Overthrowing the Iranian regime may seem like a solution, but it could also be the beginning of a new nightmare. It's easy to think that the world would be better off without the Ayatollahs in charge of Iran. But the big question that no one has answered clearly is, what would come next? And that's where the situation starts to get much more dangerous than it seems. Overthrowing an authoritarian regime is not like wiping a file and starting from scratch. It is like breaking a clock and trying to put the pieces back together in the dark. And in the case of Iran, the pieces are very complicated. The country has a deeply entrenched power structure, a highly efficient repressive machine, and, above all, a complex social reality that few people understand from the outside. Iran is not a homogeneous country. It is home to several different ethnicities and religions. Persians, Kurds, Azeris, Arabs, Baluchis, as well as Shiite Muslims, Sunnis, Jews, Christians, Zoroastrians. Overthrowing the regime may not bring unity. It may ignite an ethno-religious powder keg. It is the kind of fragmentation that makes the country implode from the inside out, just as happened in Syria. And then the result is not democracy. It is civil war. And worse, without strong and legitimate internal leadership, those who step into the vacuum are radical groups, armed militias, warlords. People who have no interest whatsoever in peace or democracy. That is exactly what happened in Iraq. That is what devastated Libya. And if it were to happen again in Iran, the regional consequences would be even more far-reaching. Now imagine this scenario. An Iran without a central government, with weapons scattered around, militias fighting for control, borders open to extremist groups, sectarian conflicts spreading to neighboring countries, and all of this in a region that is already inherently unstable. Do you really think the world wants to take that risk? And there's more. A destroyed regime also means the end of control over nuclear facilities, military arsenals, secret documents. All of this could fall into the wrong hands. A nuclear reactor under the control of a radical militia? This is not just a hypothesis. It's a real nightmare. And that's why neither Trump, with all his aggressive stance, nor Netanyahu, with all his historical opposition to Iran, wanted to pull this trigger. They know that often keeping the enemy sick is better than seeing chaos take its place. It is better to deal with a weakened, isolated regime, bleeding from within, than to create a new hell in the Middle East. And that is exactly what is happening now. Iran is suffering. Economic sanctions, internal protests, fissures within the regime elite. Women are taking to the streets, young people are losing their fear, artists, athletes, ordinary people are challenging the Ayatollahs. And that is what is dangerous for the regime, because it is not coming from outside. It is coming from within. That's why many analysts say the best way it's not bombing palaces, but rather strengthen internal movements. Support, even discreetly, civil groups that fight for women's rights, freedom of expression, and cultural change. This takes the regime out of its base. This breaks the narrative of an external enemy. This undermines the psychological control that the Ayatollahs have over the people. And this is something that authoritarian regimes cannot combat with tanks. Because the enemy is inside your own homes. But even this strategy has its risks. Because the regime, even though weakened, still has a lot of power. Still arrests, still kills, still spies. The repression is not over. And a civil rebellion can be crushed with cruelty, as we have seen happen many times. So what is the right path? Direct military intervention? Risk of all-out war? Or wait for change to come from within, even if it takes time, even if it hurts? This is the dilemma that paralyzes the United States and Israel. And perhaps the smartest thing to do, as contradictory as it may seem, is do nothing for now. Observe, weaken, follow, and hope that the Iranian people themselves decide the fate of their country. But is that enough? Or are we just postponing the inevitable? A direct confrontation with a regime that has never hidden its desire to destroy its enemies? Now imagine the following scenario. The Ayatollah's regime falls tomorrow. Suddenly, due to internal pressure, economic collapse, or popular revolt, the regime collapses. Clerics flee. The Revolutionary Guards are disbanded. Symbols of the Islamic Republic are torn down in the streets. Black flags are burned in public squares. So what happens the next day? It seems like the beginning of a new era, right? But in practice, it is the birth of a vacuum, a black hole of power, a country without leadership, without direction, without a plan. And in these holes, history shows what usually arises. Militias, chaos, violence, war between factions. A post-Ayatollah Iran would be a land without an owner, and with much to lose. Because this is not just any country. It shares borders with Afghanistan, Iraq, Pakistan, Turkey, Azerbaijan, Armenia. It is in the heart of the Middle East. It is a geopolitical centerpiece. And what's more, it's a country with nuclear know-how. One of the only countries in the world that, even under brutal sanctions, has managed to advance a secret atomic program. If the regime falls, who can guarantee that this technical knowledge won't end up in the wrong hands? Or worse, that some hidden laboratory won't continue developing weapons on behalf of some faction. Worse still, in a collapse scenario, weapons are not the only danger. Wounded nationalism, the sense of cultural invasion, the trauma of decades of religious repression, all of these can turn into even more radical reactionary force. Jihadist groups could take advantage of the instability. Allies of the old theocracy, such as Hezbollah, could try to preserve what is left, resisting the transition and sabotaging any attempt at a new order. And what if a foreign government tries to intervene in this chaos? Then there you have it, a new proxy war. Russia on one side, the United States on the other. China watching from afar but arming its allies. Europe divided. Israel on high alert. It's the kind of scenario no one wants to live through, but one everyone is about to witness if the fall is forced. And the worst part is that Iran today does not have any strong, popular, legitimate public figure with the capacity to unify the country after the regime. None. Neither inside nor outside. Reza Pahlavi, the son of the former Shah, has been trying for years to present himself as an alternative. But he is seen as the heir to an elitist monarchy, disconnected from the people and worse, supported by the West. For a people traumatized by external interference, this is political poison. Importing a new leader from abroad with the support of the US or Israel would be the biggest mistake possible. It would be repeating the mistake of the past. It would be lighting the fuse of a violent nationalist revolt, capable of uniting even internal enemies against a supposed puppet government. In other words, the risk of Iran plunging into a spiral of civil war, with militias fighting over cities, armed ethnic groups separating, and neighbors interfering, is extremely high. That is why toppling the regime, as tempting as it may seem, may not be a happy ending. It may be the first chapter of a much greater tragedy. Now, stop and think about the domino effect this would have. The stability of the Persian Gulf would be destroyed. The price of oil would skyrocket. Hezbollah could retaliate with attacks against Israel. Yemen, which is already experiencing a civil war, could become a base for extremist operations. And groups like the Taliban or even the Islamic State could take advantage of the vacuum to expand their borders of influence. The fall of Tehran, without a clear transition plan, could set an entire part of the planet on fire. And here comes the strategic coldness of Trump and Netanyahu. They know that despite the tough talk, the worst thing that could happen now would be the complete collapse of the Iranian regime with no control over what comes next. Because the enemy you know is always less dangerous than the chaos you don't control. And so the idea of keeping the regime bleeding, pressured, cornered, but still functional is more attractive than risking creating a new Afghanistan in the middle of the Middle East.